I'm Jim Grismer, Professor and Dean Emeritus at the University of Denver. Welcome to Engaging Ideas, where we bring information and ideas from the Academy to the community to help think about real-world questions. Today's discussion looks at the impacts and implications of urban growth. While growth has many benefits, it also brings challenges and raises important issues such as transportation, land use, housing, congestion, and more. Identifying and addressing these issues, creating sustainable growth, is important if cities are to retain their attractiveness. Joining me today to look at this issue is Dr. Andrew Goetz, professor at the University of Denver's Department of Geography and the Environment. He's an expert in the area of smart growth and urban sustainability. Dr. Goetz is the editor or co-author of 4 books and over 60 journal articles. His most recent book, Metropolitan Denver: Growth and Change in the Mile High City, due to be released later this year, looks at the important questions of urban growth and sustainability. Now let's begin. Professor Andy Goetz, welcome to Engaging Ideas.
Oh, thank you very much, Jim. Happy to be here.
Andy, in general, what types of challenges are growing cities facing, not only in Denver, but all across the country? Can you summarize those?
Sure. First, let me just make a few comments about the nature of urban growth. We've been experiencing an urban revolution. More and more cities have been gaining population. We now have many more people living in urban areas than in rural areas. In fact, it's over 80% living in metropolitan areas here in the United States. And so with that growth comes certain challenges. And those cities that are experiencing the most rapid growth are the ones that are facing those challenges directly. Those are in the areas of transportation, land use, housing, the impacts of motor vehicle transportation on the environment, and issues with regards to regional collaboration in trying to solve those problems.
So you mentioned transportation. Congestion is a big problem here in Denver and in many fast-growing cities.
Yes.
Can you help us understand that dimension a little better?
Sure. Our cities have grown largely over the last 50 to 60 years around the automobile and around highways. And so while it has given us some amount of benefit in terms of being able to move rapidly throughout an area in the outskirts, with increasing demand, it has created more problems with regards to congestion. We just simply haven't been able to keep pace with the growth in vehicle miles traveled. And so what's resulted is increased congestion on many of our highways and roadways, and that causes all sorts of problems as a result.
Certainly land use decisions would have a major impact on that, but it strikes me that land use decisions probably have many other implications in urban areas. What is your thinking about the role of land use decisions as it in effect fans out and affects these other areas?
Sure. Yeah. Well, partly as a result of our reliance on motor vehicles, on cars, as well as our policies with regards to land use, which has encouraged more suburbanization and more sprawling development. We've seen our cities just expand outward very rapidly. And again, while there are some benefits that come along with that, there have been a lot of costs associated with it, particularly with regards to the environment. We've seen an increase in the amount of land consumption as well as air quality problems from the transportation. Plus, people become very reliant on their cars, and today we're in the range of 70 to 80% of all trips being made by the car, and that kind of domination or that imbalance is really something that has become a problem. And so one of the solutions and one of the strategies that many cities have been attempting to pursue is to create a more balanced transportation system.
Following up on the matter of traffic congestion, what are the causes, and we talked about land use certainly, but what are the opportunities? What can we do?
Sure, yeah. Well, congestion is a very difficult problem. We've been dealing with trying to deal with congestion for the last 50 to 60 years. It keeps getting worse. Right. And in its very simple sense, it's when you have too much demand for a limited supply,
right.
And so that's what results in congestion. There are lots of things that could be done about it, but one of the difficulties associated with it is in terms of keeping up with the infrastructure, because these things are building highways and other transportation infrastructure is very expensive. And so that takes very effective planning, far-sighted planning, to think about what the future will require and the best ways to accommodate the mobility needs of our population. We haven't done a great job of that, and I think congestion is one of the results from that.
We see technology being employed to try and create better flow of traffic and that kind of thing. Are those types of strategies being used around the country, and to what degree do they relieve the problem?
Right. Well, I think technology does have a lot of promise to it. For instance, right now, there's a lot of interest in automation, automated vehicles, connected vehicles, and the possibilities that can help to alleviate some of our transportation problems, congestion problems especially. And I think that it is one of the pieces to the puzzle that we need to explore and see to what extent can this technology really help us to alleviate our problems. Another area of strategy that cities have been employing is to develop our transit systems to a much greater extent. And so we've seen many of our bigger cities developing more extensive rail transit systems, investing more in their buses too, and trying to encourage more transit use. We've also seen an increase in the amount of biking and walking, and the development of higher density mixed use activity centers in cities. And so those strategies all together are ways to try to address the mobility challenges.
That's really interesting. There's a lot of talk, of course, about the issues facing urban areas as they grow, but it strikes me that creating the solutions is pretty challenging, because you not only have the core city, but you have a multiplicity of suburban cities and even various counties, each of which is its own governing structure. So how can cities across a metropolitan area deal with some of these complex problems when you have all these different governments?
Yeah, that's a very good point. As our cities have grown outward, we have incorporated more and more suburban municipalities, separate political entities. And so for quite a long time, those separate entities did their own planning independently of the other cities. We found that was a problem. In some areas, it's like transportation, in economic development, in environmental impacts. Those issues are really best dealt with at a regional scale. And so you need all of these cities and suburbs to work together to solve these problems, because the problems don't end at the boundary of one city and another, they continue. And so it's really best to have a strong level of collaboration amongst the cities and suburbs of a region to solve these problems collectively. And that's been a big challenge, but I think in recent years more and more metropolitan areas have come to realize that there are significant benefits and gains from working collaboratively rather than separately.
So as you look across the country at these growing metro areas, Are you seeing new collaborative structures being developed and put in place to deal with this kind of problem?
Yes, absolutely. I think Denver is a particularly good example of that. Denver has been developing new regional collaborations, not traditional ones. There's a group here called the Metro Mayors Caucus, which is an informal group that has been put together and has worked together over the last 20 years to deal with issues of regional importance. And that group has kind of laid the groundwork for coming up with solutions to regional issues that then get solved through the regular channels, such as metropolitan planning organizations and other groups that have been established to deal with these things.
This whole issue of sustainable development strikes me as not only complex, but an area fraught with public policy implications.
Mm-hmm.
What is your take on that? Can you share some of the implications in that dimension with us?
Oh, sure, yeah. I mean, this is just a natural public policy area. It affects all of us. Many of us live in cities. Those of us who do realize that these are things that affect our day-to-day lives. Mm-hmm. And so public policy implications run through the gamut. When we're thinking about investing in infrastructure, those are very big decisions. They come with high price tags. They have very long-lasting consequences. So we have to be very careful about making the right decision. When we are coming up with land use policies or environmental policies or economic development policies, those things affect quite a number of people, huge public policy implications for all of those.
One of the things that strikes me is that we've talked about the sort of interjurisdictional relations, but you also have, as you just pointed out, relations between policies within a jurisdiction. Mm-hmm. The economic policy affects the land use policy, affects the development policy, affects the traffic policy. How are those, how do cities typically negotiate those within the context of a single city as between the different policy elements?
Yeah, and that's been a big challenge too, because historically those areas have been dealt with separately. Mm-hmm. And only in recent years have we begun to realize how interrelated those things really are, and that even within the same government, right, you need to have people who are working in transportation and land use talking to each other and working together to solve those. Especially in the areas of transportation and land use, those things are very interconnected. So in order to understand how one operates, you really need to understand how the other does and what the mutual interactions are between them.
So your emphasis on coordination is really important, both in terms of various jurisdictions and within a jurisdiction.
Absolutely, yeah. So it creates an even more complicated picture because you've got it based on each individual topical area as well as the geographical units. So it's another level of complexity.
This whole area, the whole notion of sustainable development, is something that affects us all in our daily lives. What are some key points, some key questions that you would urge our viewers to think about and perhaps discuss with others with respect to this notion of sustainable development?
Sure, yeah. I would encourage everyone to think carefully about where it is they live and what is their vision for the future of the place where they live. What do they want to see? What do you want to see your city, your metropolitan area become in the future? What are the improvements that need to be made? Think about where that city is today. What are the issues and problems that you're currently facing? Think about what you'd like for the future, and then how do you achieve that? What's the pathway? What are the pathways? And then become engaged in the process. Help to make that a reality. And I think those are all things that we can do and that we should be doing. Planning is a public activity, and everyone should be a part of it because we're all part of our cities and our regions, and we all have a stake in them.
I hope you'll join us in the future as we bring more engaging ideas from the Academy to the community I want to especially thank our guest, Professor Andrew Getz, for his very thoughtful comments and raising a really important subject. I'm Jim Grismer. Thank you for watching.